Well, for more on this historic mission, let's cross now to Brisbane to speak with Dr. Chris James, Senior Lecturer at the Centre for Hypersonics at the University of Queensland. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Now, NASA is hailing Artemis II as a record-setting mission. Even though the agency already sent humans to the moon decades ago, this was on a whole different level, wasn't it? Can you just give us a sense of how much of a scientific feat this was?
Yeah, so the Artemis II mission prepares us to move toward a permanent base on the moon, right? So NASA's Artemis spacecraft, like the Apollo capsule, included everything, right? Like they had their little lander, they had their little buggy, and they could do a full mission with just that spacecraft, right? Whereas Artemis can't do that, but it's a machine that's set up so then when they can build other infrastructure, they can go down to the moon and they can eventually, we can have a permanent base on the moon, hopefully, in the future.
So it's very much step by step. And as NASA says, it was very much the beginning of a new mission. Now, there were some glitches, though. Can you explain what they were and how dangerous they were?
Yeah, so you mean in terms of like small issues with the toilet and things like that, or do you mean the heat shield, like larger potential issues?
Can you elaborate a little bit more? So how significant were those
Okay, so
issues?
I think, okay, yeah. So when they did the Artemis 1 mission, so like you said, it's very much a stepping stone type thing. So the first mission they did was Artemis 1, where they sent an uncrewed mission to the moon. They flew around the moon and they came back and they re-entered, and that was all successful. It came back safely, all worked out very well, obviously. But one thing that slowed everything down was the heat shield that protects the spacecraft during the entry didn't behave like they expected. So they took the material that was used on the Apollo capsule, it's called Avcoat, and they made a new reconstituted version that they made tiles from. Whereas the old Apollo vehicle had a honeycomb and they filled in the honeycomb, small areas, they made these tiles. And what they believe happened was that during the entry, pressure built up inside those tiles and it made the heat shield recess more than they expected, like chunks came off. So that was something that was concerning and that they were worried about for the Artemis II mission. So for Artemis II, to deal with this problem, one thing that they could have done for Artemis 3, they've made the heat shield more porous, right, to stop the pressure building up. Whereas from Artemis 2, they already had the heat shield on the vehicle. So the problem was if they decided to change it, they'd have to take the whole heat shield off, make a whole new one, right? And that's very time-consuming and expensive. So what they did is they modified the trajectory. So the trajectory didn't take as long, so there wasn't as much of a heat load, which is the integrated total heating, and they didn't give it as much time to cool down and then heat back up. And they hope, and it seems like the entry today went extremely well. So I don't think there was, hopefully, nothing to worry about.
So hopefully nothing to worry about. Do you think it could have gone wrong?
Well, they just weren't sure, right? Like, as I said, Artemis 1 entered perfectly, right? The vehicle survived, entry was largely nominal, but you've got to remember this is a mission that costs tens of billions of dollars, and they do a lot of testing, a lot of simulations to work out how the spacecraft should behave, right? So then when the spacecraft lands and it did something they didn't expect, that's a very scary prospect, right? Because it shows that they didn't study it in the way that they should have, or there might have been phenomena that they didn't understand. So I think that's something that was worrying lots of people a small bit, myself included. So it's great to see that they got home safe.
Now, of course, that reminds us of the darkest chapter in space exploration. That was the Columbia disaster. And that led to the end of the Space Shuttle mission. Now, since then, space exploration has really been transformed. NASA now outsources its cargo rocket launches to private companies, and SpaceX now has virtual monopoly in this field. Could the latest feat then mark a comeback for NASA?
Yeah, I think so. Like this has shown that NASA can perform one of these very big missions, right? Like you said, many things have been outsourced to SpaceX, to Boeing, like Amazon, Jeff Bezos' company, Blue Origin is doing a lot of stuff too. But I think this is something that there's no commercial need for yet. Like these big heavy lift rockets that can take a fairly large spacecraft with people to the moon, there's not a business case for that yet, right? So I think in the future there might be, but I think certainly there's a place for NASA a part for NASA to play for providing this heavy launch moon rocket until the commercial companies see that that's a viable thing in the future, hopefully.
So, for the time being, it's still a scientific mission. You're saying that there's no business at stake yet. Meanwhile, the space race is very much on. China also has a massive space ambition. What is the competition looking like, and can Europe become a major player too?
Yeah, I think certainly. I think there's going to be lots of people wanting to come to the moon because we just don't know what's there, right? The theory is that there's going to be lots of ice on the moon. If you have ice, ice is like water is obviously H2O, hydrogen, and like oxygen. So if you can break that apart, you can form oxygen that people can breathe. If you've got hydrogen and oxygen, you've got fuel and oxidizer for rockets. So I think like obviously China has the heavy rockets you've mentioned. Europe has very large rockets with the Ariane 6. Certainly, if they wanted to build bigger rockets, I think Europe could certainly play a part as well.
Now, this is very much NASA sort of laying the groundwork for its future ambitions. How realistic do you think the goal of building a permanent base on the moon within the next few years actually is?
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult thing. Like I said earlier, the Apollo capsule was fully self-contained. It could do a full mission down to the moon, move around a bit, come back up and go home. Whereas the Artemis program relies on there being vehicles that can transfer the astronauts to the moon, do stuff on the moon, and come back up, right? And those vehicles currently don't exist, right? So SpaceX is planning to use a version of their Starship for this, which is getting there, but is not quite there yet. And Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' company, is also trying to build something, but they're not so far along, right? So until those other pieces, until they exist, like we know that Artemis is doing very well now, but until the other pieces of the puzzle exist, then the mission will not be able to be completed like NASA would like. But hopefully those companies are making fast progress, and at least sometime around then will hopefully be possible.
What kind of a time frame are we looking at? So not by 2028, but within the next decade or
Yeah,
so?
yeah, I certainly think so. I think there's a real push for people to do this. I think the next 2 years is very ambitious. Like it could be done. I know these space companies work very quickly, but yeah, I think certainly in the next decade, like we've spent so long in low Earth orbit with the space shuttle and then the space station, especially with the space station reaching the end of its life. I think it's natural in some sense that the moon becomes the next place that humans try to go for space exploration.
Well, James Chris from the University of Queensland, thank you so much for your analysis.